I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 253 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, How Fear Makes Us Fiction Writers. So recently, I was listening to a podcast and I heard Jay Shetty say something that stopped me in my tracks. And I'll just say this, if you don't know Jay Shetty, you should. He is just a fantastic podcaster and voice of wisdom in the world, someone who I really love listening to. And Jay said, fear makes us fiction writers. And I just froze when I heard him say that, because the power in that sentence is just unreal, right? Fear makes us fiction writers. You just get it immediately. And it's really crazy how often fear kind of grabs the pen, right, or the keyboard from our hands and starts writing a story. And it's a particular brand of story that it writes, and it sort of insists that we follow that direction. And that story is always fiction. So today I thought maybe I would credit Jay with the awesome quote, right, because that's his work, but then talk a little bit about where that led me in terms of reflection and thinking about how it is that fear does that thing, how it sort of, again, grabs the pen and makes us fiction writers. And I think it boils down to the fact that when we are afraid, when we are not operating from a place of security or safety, right? When we're afraid, we go to worst case scenarios. Right? We really never go to best case scenarios when we're sitting in a place of fear. And when you combine the fact that we are really creative as a species, and maybe even especially creative when we're afraid, then that, coupled with this kind of worst case scenario thing, gets us to a place where nothing real is really going through our minds at that point in time. So in psychology, they call these mental distortions. There's a number of them, and I'm going to talk about several of them with you today. And there are more than just these, just the ones that I'm going to kind of dig into. These are some that I've been particularly paying attention to lately. And I think it's enough for today. And then maybe we'll do another episode sometime on other mental distortions or cognitive distortions that you might recognize in yourself. I think the really cool thing is sort of once this gets revealed to you, especially if it's the first time you're hearing some of this vocabulary, it's like the scales fall from your eyes, right? And you just start to see things in a different way. It's like you can't go back and unsee the pattern once it's revealed to you. And that is very powerful, because I firmly believe knowledge is power, and that when you know better, you do better. And so once a little bit of this is revealed to you, you might find that you are better able to manage some of these stories that your mind is creating on your behalf, right? Or to your detriment, as the case may be. So I want you to kind of imagine a number of different scenarios. Put yourself into this story, if you will, as we go through these, and think about something where you are experiencing a level of fear or a level of uncertainty these days, right? Because we all have them. We all have places where we're just not sure how something's going to work out, or there's something in our life that is causing us a level of stress or distress or fear. And that's kind of the area that I want you to dance around in your mind today as we go through this. And I'm going to give you some examples to just help illustrate the points. But the key thing is, where does this land for you? So the first cognitive distortion that I want to talk about is catastrophizing, which first of all is just a really fun word to say, right? Catastrophizing. And this really is the nuts and bolts of worst case scenario imagination. It's what I sometimes call, I'll sometimes say to my clients, we start off with a little bit of this fear writing a fiction story. And the next thing we know, we're penniless and on the streets, right? Like your brain will very rapidly take you to this worst possible outcome that you can imagine. So it'll be like, well, I could apply for a new job. But if I quit my job and I applied for a new job and I didn't get it, then if I didn't get it, I wouldn't have any money. And if I didn't have any money coming in, I would blow through my savings and then I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage. And then the next thing you know, right, like you're homeless, you're on the streets, you're destitute. But there are about 65 million decisions that you would have to make badly before you would get from here to there. And of course, in that nanosecond that it takes your brain to invent this scenario, you're not thinking about any of those. You're just homeless, right? Before you know what happened. So this catastrophizing is where very rapidly we will take the seed of a could maybe not work out for me outcome. And before we know it, we are in the worst possible outcome. Another one would be like you get on the airplane, you get out your book, you start to read, there's a little bit of turbulence, and quickly you're like, oh my God, this plane might go down, right? And you start imagining the scenarios of like, how did they tell me to put that life vest on? And do I really remember? Are we over water right now? And, should I text my family? And quickly, right? We are at worst case scenario. It's like the airwaves of our brain have been taken over. And the only scenario that we can imagine is the very worst case. So that is, of course, a work of fiction, right? We have created a completely made up story about something that could happen. At our worst, I think we start convincing ourselves about the probability of it happening. Like, no, it actually could happen because planes have gone down or because people have, in fact, lost their jobs and ended up completely unable to pay their mortgage. But it's the rapidity, right? It's how quickly we're making those jumps and leaps that are really what's causing the problem. So catastrophizing is the first one of these that I want you to sort of pay attention to and be on the lookout for in your life. The next one is all or nothing thinking, sometimes called black and white thinking, sometimes called cognitive rigidity. Okay, so probably the simplest term is all or nothing thinking. And I think that this one sort of gets introduced to us when we are in school. And our goal is to get the A, right? Our goal is I want to get an A on this test, this paper in this class. And if we are at all concerned about our ability to get an A, what is the phrase that everybody is saying, like in the lunchroom or the hallway or the locker room? If you put yourself back in that scenario, what do you hear people saying, right? They're not saying, I might get a B, right? Or I might get a C. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, oh my God, I'm going to fail, right? I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to fail this class. No one is walking around saying, oh my gosh, I might get a B minus, right? But that's actually a way more likely outcome than literally failing. Okay, right? This is why we have bell curves. It's most likely that you're going to get a C. So the all or nothing thinking takes us we get ping-ponged between the two ends of the extreme. It's either perfect or it's a disaster, right? I've done it exactly right, or I am an abject failure. I'm going to get the A or I'm going to fail. So this is where you get things like, all right, I am on a healthy eating journey, right? I am going to feed my body food that feels good to me. And look at me. Here's what I had for breakfast. Here's what I had for lunch. And then I had a brownie. And this is the person who says, well, apparently I suck. And for the rest of the day, right, they eat any junk that is put in front of them because it's all over, right? Because if I wasn't perfect, I'm a disaster. So now who cares? Instead of, well, I ate the brownie. And then I had something that felt really good in my body for dinner. And then I had a cup of tea. And then I started again the next day, right? Where in totality, that day is probably pretty healthy. And it had a brownie in it, right? We could argue the brownie might be healthy. So I think there's this all or nothing, I'm succeeding or failing sort of dichotomy that we can get caught up in. And our brain can tell us when we are afraid of not getting the A or not having control over our relationship with food, or not doing well at work. Whenever we're afraid, it can tell us we are a complete disaster. Okay. So you want to pay attention for that all or nothing and seek middle ground, right? Where are there maybe some ways of looking at this that live a little bit more in the middle? That would be the healthier approach than living in the completely fictionalized account of worst case scenario planning or all or nothing thinking. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. All right, I'm going to talk about like 3 more of these patterns. So we talked about catastrophizing. We talked about all or nothing thinking. The next one is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization. And this is the fiction that says, because this happened once, it will always happen, right? Or because it didn't happen this time, it's never going to happen. It also shows up as, if one person thinks this, everyone thinks this, right? Or if one person said this, everyone is always going to say this or do this. So we take one experience, one example, mathematically, n equals 1. We've got one example. And then we move it to always, never, everyone, no one, right? You hear the generalization. It's like a big, giant umbrella that goes over this one experience that says every other experience that looks anything like this one is going to turn out the same way. And the truth is, we will go out and look for evidence to support that hypothesis. We will start telling ourselves, well, I know it's always going to go this way. And then we almost like bring that to us, right? So then we can start to string together multiple examples to support our hypothesis, right? Even though it's completely fiction. So you will hear people say like, oh, this always happens to me, right? Why does this always happen to me? Or why is every guy I date like this? Or how come every boss I have is like this, right? This is the overgeneralization of we are seeing patterns where patterns likely don't exist. That one time I tried to be honest with my boss about something and that conversation didn't go well. So I'm never doing that again because that is how bosses will treat me if I'm honest. That overgeneralization causes us to write the ending of the story when we really don't know the ending of the story. Okay. So it's kind of think of that one as the big umbrella over things. The next one that I see is personalization. And I think this one, I might have named this one different, but I wanted to give you the actual, what is the psychological term? So the term is personalization. You might think of this as blame or taking the blame. So this is a distortion where you either entirely blame yourself or you entirely blame someone else for a situation that actually involved lots of factors that were out of your control. Okay. I think this shows up a lot in parenting. I think this is maybe part of the manifestation of mom guilt. So he didn't make the team because I didn't sign him up for the right camp. Right? It's my fault that he didn't make the team because I didn't sign him up for the right camp. Or it's my fault that he didn't do well in that class because I just didn't invest enough time in homework with him. Right? Or I didn't have the money to provide this thing, or I didn't have the time. So it's taking the responsibility for something that actually is a multifaceted situation. We can do this to other people as well. We can say it's someone else's fault. I think our moms probably classically get blamed for things, and then we as moms get blamed for things by our children. So this is where we just want someone else to say, well, it didn't happen because my husband didn't do this, because my boss didn't handle this, my colleague didn't do this. In reality, there are many, many things that probably worked together, like knit themselves together to produce that outcome. So I think where this one's at its most dangerous is when we are telling ourselves it's our fault. That can really put us in a spiral of self-doubt or self-loathing, right? And again, it is completely fiction. It's like this one is we're only looking at one little piece of the story, and maybe we do have a level of responsibility, right? Or maybe someone else did drop a ball that contributed to this situation, but it's probably not the only factor, right? There's probably more than one thing at play. So that one is a little bit insidious because we want to tell people to take responsibility, right, for their own actions, for what their part of the situation is. We just don't want to end up where we are taking on blame for a situation that had many things that were actually outside of our control. Okay. And then the last pattern that I think is where fear makes us fiction writers is when we're jumping to conclusions, right? And this one takes on two different sort of sub patterns. One is mind reading, like I know what she is going to say, or I know what she is going to think. If this happens, I know exactly how she's going to respond, right? We're like reading their mind like like as though we had mind control. And the other way is fortune telling or sort of predicting the future, where we're predicting how events will unfold. So one is more about other people. What will this person think? What will they say? And the other one is about, I know exactly how this is going to go down. I know exactly what will happen if I do that thing. And guess what? We don't know, right? We are making stuff up. We are writing fiction, right? Because do we really know what someone else is thinking? Do we really know how a series of events is going to unfold? No, right? We can make some well-informed predictions based on past experience, but we don't really know. And again, remember, we grounded all of this in the emotion of fear. So when we're doing that, when we are writing those stories from a place of fear, they're not going to have happy endings, right? We're going to tell ourselves all the things that could go wrong. Well, I know what he's going to say. I know what they're going to do. And they're not going to be positives, right? When we are from a position of fear. So collectively, this collection of patterns can really upend your life. Catastrophizing, right? The worst case scenario planning, all or nothing thinking, where it's either perfect or a disaster, overgeneralization. This will always or never or everyone, right? We kind of put the big umbrella up. Personalization, where we're taking too much responsibility for something, paradoxically, right? Or the last one that I was talking about, I think all of those have the potential to really upend our lives if we let them. And so what's the antidote? Well, the antidote is to think about, is there a positive spin on all of this what if planning? A lot of this is really rooted in kind of the what if nature of life, of not really knowing, but thinking that we might know, right? Convincing ourselves that we know, kind of behaving as though we know the outcome. And in reality, we don't know. So the answer, one thing to try is to think about challenging yourself to come up with a positive version of the what if statements. Challenging yourself to say, what would be still fictionalized, positive outcome that I could get from this particular situation that I'm in? And if we can find that, if we can find the positive what if, then we stand a chance at offsetting a lot of these negatives, right? It's sort of like we can at least put them on equal ground. Our mind has a second scenario to consider. And so that's my challenge for you today is when you find yourself in one of these cognitive distortions, when you find yourself in one of these loops and you're like stuck there, can you come up with a positive version of the what if? And I would love to hear from you if you've been able to do that, because I know, sometimes you listen to this and then you think, I'm going to try that. I'm going to see if I can make that work. If you do, I would love to hear from you. So positive what ifs are going to be our new way of writing better fiction, right? The truth is we don't know exactly how anything's going to work out. And if we're going to write fiction, we may as well write happy endings and then sit in the energy that those bring to see if it can help us feel better and take more positive actions all along the ride. Okay. Come hit me up on Instagram. Tell me what you thought of this episode. I'm at @CSkolnicki, or you can find Brilliant Balance at @brilliant_balance. Would love to hear from you. Also, if you got something out of this episode, share it with a friend who maybe needs to hear about these patterns so that they can find some freedom from them. That's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.